The boy stood in the yard. Elliot Bishop first saw him from the upstairs window of his childhood home, just past midnight. The boy was thin, barefoot, and wearing nothing but an old-fashioned set of pajamas, white with blue pinstripes. He stood completely still on the edge of the lawn, just beyond the street lamp's glow. Elliot blinked. The boy hadn't moved. Something about the way he stood, too stiff, too unnatural, sent a chill down Elliot's spine. His arms hung straight at his sides, his head slightly tilted, as if he were listening to something just out of reach. Elliot shivered. He was too old to be afraid of ghost stories. He had come back to his mother's house for one reason, to pack up the past and leave Cedar Mills behind for good. But as he watched the boy in the yard, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. That creeping, crawling fear. Because Elliot knew that boy. He had seen him before. It had been 20 years ago, when he was 8 years old. The house on Wren Street had been Elliot's home for most of his childhood. It was a classic two-story colonial, old and full of creaking wood and fading wallpaper. His mother still lived there, though she was now in a hospital bed, 2 states away, slipping further from reality with each passing day. Elliot had avoided coming back for years. The house carried too many ghosts, too many things left buried. But it wasn't until the movers arrived earlier that afternoon that he saw it again, the basement door, and the locks. There were 5 of them. Thick, rusted bolts lined the frame, reinforcing the wooden door like a cage. It hadn't been opened in decades. His mother had always told him never to go near it. "That door stays locked, Elliot. Always." He had asked why, back when he was young enough to still believe his mother could protect him from anything. She never gave him a real answer. Just the same cryptic words she had repeated so many times. Because he's still down there. Elliot had stopped asking questions when he was 12. He stopped believing in childhood nightmares. But now, the nightmare was standing in his front yard. And it was looking at him. His breath caught as the boy moved. Not walked, not turned, shifted. And that 1 second he was standing on the lawn, the next he was closer, halfway to the porch. Elliot's stomach dropped. The boy's face was still hidden in shadow, but something about the way he stood, the way his arms hung limply at his sides, made Elliot's skin crawl. Then the whisper came. A voice, thin and reedy, snaking its way through the night. "Elliot." Elliot staggered backward from the window, his heart hammering in his chest. No, that wasn't real. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to look again. The yard was empty. No boy, no footprints in the damp grass, just the wind rustling through the trees. Elliot exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Stress. That's all this was. The house, the memories, the exhaustion from driving 12 hours straight. He turned away from the window, shaking his head. But as he did, something caught his eye. On the nightstand. A single, dirty handprint smeared across the wood. Small. Too small. Like a child's. And just beneath it, scratched into the surface of the table, were 3 words. "Let me out." Elliot's breath hitched in his throat. The words on the nightstand, "Let me out," looked fresh, as if the wood had just been gouged. His fingers trembled as he ran them over the deep scratches, feeling the splintered grooves beneath his skin. This was a prank. It had to be. He turned sharply toward the bedroom door, half expecting to find someone standing there. One of the movers, a local kid messing around. But the hallway was empty, filled only with the distant tick of the old grandfather clock downstairs. The house felt different now. He tried to shake the feeling, to push it away, but the memory was already creeping in. The first time he had seen the boy. Elliot had been 8 years old, playing in the backyard, when he first heard the whispers. At first, he thought it was the wind moving through the trees. But the more he listened, the more the words took shape, forming a breathy, rasping sound. Elliot. He turned toward the house, and there, in the basement window, was a face. A boy. Pale, hollow, hands pressed against the glass, fingers too thin, too sharp. His mouth moved, forming words Elliot couldn't hear. "Help me." Elliot had run inside, calling for his mother, but by the time she got there, the window was empty. That night, she added more locks to the basement door. That was the last time Elliot spoke of the boy. Now, standing in his childhood bedroom, Elliot's gaze drifted toward the hallway. The basement door was still there, still locked. But for how long? His mother had been obsessed with that door. She had never let anyone near it, never let the movers clear out the basement, never explained why it needed so many locks. But now, with her gone, Elliot took a step forward, then another. By the time he reached the top of the stairs, his pulse was hammering against his ribs. The basement door stood at the end of the hallway. It looked the same as always. Old wood, 5 thick locks, the faint scent of mildew seeping from beneath the frame. But there was something else now. The door was shaking. Not violently, just a slow, rhythmic tremor, like something inside was pressing against it. Elliot's stomach twisted. This was ridiculous. There was nothing in that basement. But then he heard it. A faint scratching sound. His breath caught in his throat. Fingernails dragging against the wood. "Let me out." The whisper was barely audible, but it was there. Elliot took a step back, his entire body screaming at him to run. But before he could move, the locks began to slide open. One by one. Click, 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 click. His blood ran cold. The final lock hung loose, swaying slightly, the only thing left keeping the door closed. Then, in the silence, came the last sound. A child's laugh. Soft, hollow, right behind him. Elliot turned, and the basement door burst open. The door slammed against the wall. A gust of damp, rotting air surged up from the basement, hitting Elliot like a physical force. It smelled of mildew and something else, something deeper, more foul, like old earth that had been disturbed. Elliot stumbled back, heart hammering, his eyes locked on the darkness beyond the doorway. The basement should have been pitch black. No windows, no light. But something moved. A shape, thin, pale, crawled out from the shadows. Not walked, crawled. Its fingers, too long, too sharp, dug into the floor as it dragged itself forward, its limbs bending at the wrong angles, joints twisting unnaturally. Its breath rasped, a dry, choking sound, like something that hadn't used its lungs in a long, long time. Then it lifted its head, and Elliot saw its face, the boy from the yard, the boy from the basement window all those years ago, the hollow boy. His eyes were wide, too wide, like deep pits in his skull, reflecting no light. His mouth hung slightly open, lips cracked and dry. He smiled, but there was nothing human in it. And then he spoke. "You left me," the boy whispered. His voice was wrong, too layered, as if more than one person was speaking through him. Elliot's hands gripped the staircase railing behind him. "You're not real," he said, his voice shaking. "You're just a story. Something I made up." The hollow boy twitched. His head snapped sideways, his bones making a wet, cracking noise. "Not real?" The voice sounded amused. "I am all that's left of you, Elliot." The room groaned. The house itself seemed to shudder, the walls breathing around him. The air grew thick, suffocating. And the whispers returned, not just from the boy, from behind him, from inside the house. He could hear them crawling in the walls, shifting under the floorboards, pressing against the windows. Dozens of voices, more than dozens, and they were all whispering his name. Elliot. His stomach twisted, his vision blurred. The house wasn't empty. It had never been empty. A sharp pain seared through his skull, as if something else was trying to take root inside his mind. Memories he didn't recognize. Flashes of children trapped in the basement, screaming, crying, their faces twisted in agony. Elliot gasped, clutching his head. The hollow boy laughed, and then he lunged, straight at Elliot. Elliot didn't think, he just ran. His feet pounded against the wooden floor as he sprinted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The whispers followed, slithering through the house, crawling under his skin. He reached the 2nd floor, slammed the bedroom door behind him, and threw his weight against it. Silence. The whispers stopped. His breath came in ragged gasps. His hands shook. He didn't dare move. Minutes passed. Then, click. The closet door behind him opened, and something breathed right next to his ear. Elliot went rigid. The breath against his ear was cold, too cold. It smelled of damp wood and something metallic, like rusted iron. His entire body screamed at him not to turn around. But he did. The closet door was wide open. Inside, the space was pitch black, as if the light refused to touch it. Elliot's own reflection stared back at him from the mirror mounted on the inside of the door. Except, his reflection wasn't moving. Elliot's breath hitched. His real hands trembled. But in the mirror, his reflection stood perfectly still, watching. Then, slowly, impossibly, it smiled. A long, curling grin that stretched too wide across its face. Elliot staggered back, his heart hammering. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The reflection blinked. Not normally, all at once. Every inch of it snapped out of focus and then back again, as if something had tried to take its shape but hadn't quite gotten it right. Then, it stepped forward. But Elliot hadn't moved. It was coming out of the mirror. His breath caught as the glass rippled like water, the reflection pushing against it, distorting as it stretched through. Elliot turned to run, but the bedroom door was gone. His pulse pounded against his skull. The walls warped and twisted, pulsing as if the house itself was alive. Shadows curled across the ceiling, stretching into long, clawed fingers. And then, the hollow boy spoke. "It's not a house, Elliot. It's a door." Elliot's mouth went dry. The reflection was almost out. Its hands breached the glass, skin shifting, morphing into something that wasn't human. Elliot knew. He couldn't let it out. But before he could move, something grabbed his ankle. He fell hard onto the wooden floor, breath knocking from his lungs. And when he looked down, the hands were coming through the cracks. Pale, writhing fingers pushed up from the spaces between the floorboards, grasping, pulling at him. They weren't human hands. They were wrong. Boneless. Shifting, stretching into the shapes of things that shouldn't exist. The house was swallowing him. The reflection was almost free. And the hollow boy was laughing. "You think you left me down there?" His voice rasped. "You were always here, Elliot. You just forgot." Elliot's vision blurred. His mind snapped, twisted, bent. Then, a sound. A new sound. A bell, loud, echoing, ringing through the walls like a distant church tower. The hands recoiled. The reflection froze. The house shuddered. And for the first time, Elliot remembered the truth. The bell tolled. Deep, distant pulling. The reflection in the mirror twitched. The hands slithering through the cracks recoiled, curling away as if burned by the sound. The walls shuddered, breathed, trembled. Elliot felt it all at once, memories unraveling. The hollow boy had lied. Elliot hadn't left him in the basement. He had been the one locked inside. 20 years ago, his mother hadn't been protecting Elliot from the hollow boy. She had been protecting everyone else. Elliot had been sick. That's what she had called it. A sickness of the soul. He remembered now. The voices. The whispers creeping through the walls. The things in the dark that had spoken to him at night, slithering into his dreams, promising they could make him whole. And he had listened. He had let them in. His mother had known. She had seen it in his eyes, heard it in the way he spoke in his sleep, the words not his own. She had done the only thing she could. She had locked him away. Not out of cruelty, not out of fear, out of love. And the hollow boy, the thing that had crawled out of him, the thing that wore his face, had been left behind, starving, waiting for Elliot to return. Now, the house was waking up again. The bell's toll was fading. The hollow boy was still here. And this time, he wasn't letting Elliot go. The reflection lurched forward from the mirror, its shape twisting, contorting, mouth splitting wide in a grin too full of teeth. Elliot moved. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. He lunged toward the closet, grabbed the mirror, and with every ounce of strength left in his body, slammed it to the floor. The glass exploded. A sound. Not a scream, but something deeper, something wrong. Ripped through the house. The walls buckled, cracked, split open. The hollow boy shrieked. His form rippled, collapsed inward, sucked back toward the jagged shards of glass littering the floor. His grin melted into a scream of rage. No. The voice rattled Elliot's bones. The house shook itself apart. The hands reached for him one last time. And then, everything fell silent. Elliot woke to the sound of rain. The house was gone. Nothing remained of 104 Wren Street. No walls, no floors, no crumbling wood. Just ash. The remnants of something that had never been meant to exist. He was lying in the dirt, the morning sun barely breaking through the thick storm clouds above. And in front of him, half buried in the rubble, a single dusty mirror, cracked, splintered, but reflecting something that wasn't there. A boy, thin, hollow, smiling. Elliot stared. His breath came in slow, shallow gasps. He reached for the mirror, and when he touched it, the boy's hand moved with his, like a reflection. But Elliot wasn't smiling. Not at all. The house may have burned, but the hollow boy never really left, and now neither could Elliot.